Now I'd like to invite our next panel up onto the stage, if you would join us now. And while they're doing that, I will introduce our moderator, who is well known to any Washington Post reader in the room, which includes me. Mary Jordan is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and best-selling author. She currently writes about national political issues for the Washington Post after working for 14 years abroad as a foreign correspondent based in Tokyo, Mexico City, and London. She has interviewed many top celebrities, including Paul McCartney, Tony Blair, and my favorite, Julie Andrews, just recently, right? Please join me in welcoming Mary and the rest of the panel.
I don't know any family that doesn't talk about the issues that we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about, and I just feel so good to be in a room with so many smart people in front of me and on stage. So it's a special treat, and I'm going to ask these big brains next to me to introduce yourself and tell me what is your tech connection.
Sure. So I'm Joseph Wender, Senior Advisor to Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts. I'm here primarily because Senator Markey has been leading on technology and privacy issues and children's issues for many years. And he's introduced a bill called the Children and Media Research Advancement Act, which would direct NIH to spend $95 million to research what is the impact of technology in media on kids. It's a bipartisan bill that's got growing industry support and advocacy support, and I'm happy to talk more about it throughout the panel.
Great. Okay.
I'm Jenny Radesky. I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician. I practice at University of Michigan at C.S. Mott Children's Hospital. I am a mom of a 5 and a 9-year-old, and I also was the lead author of the American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines for media use by kids 5 and under, which came out in 2016. I perform research that's funded by NICHD, looking at early childhood development and mostly mobile and interactive media use.
Great. Jordan?
I'm Jordan Shapiro. I'm a fellow at the Joan Ganz Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop and also a fellow at the Brookings Institution, in both places where I look at the cultural impact of tech on kids. I have 2 children of my own, 2 boys that are 11 and 13.
Catherine?
I'm Catherine Price. I'm a science journalist and author of a book called How to Break Up with Your Phone. I meant to show a real copy, but I gave them away. And it is a 2-part book. The first half, called The Wake Up, looks at the science of what screen time does to our brains and our bodies, and explains how apps are designed to suck us in. And then the second half, The Breakup, is a evidence-backed plan for how you can create a healthier relationship with your devices. It's not about dumping your phone or throwing it out. I always need to reassure people. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Jim Griffin. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Child Development and Behavior Branch at the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development at the National Institutes of Health. And we fund research relevant to pretty much all the topics that have been discussed here. My area is early learning and school readiness, which of course intersects with the tech sector.
All right, Jenny, really briefly, the guidelines are under 2, how much time?
Try to limit altogether and use it for connection. Use it for video chatting, Skyping, FaceTiming with friends. We did tell parents, don't feel rushed into introducing tech early. You're not putting your kid at a disadvantage if you choose to live a kind of low-tech household. If you want to introduce tech early, co-view, play together. They're really not going to learn much from it unless you're there helping them transfer what they're seeing on the screen to the rest of the world. Now, preschool years, we still want kids to have enough sleep, play, outdoor time, parent conversations, and meals. So we recommended a limit of an hour per day of entertainment.
An hour per day, what age and under?
An hour per day is 5, like 2 to 5.
5 and under. All right, 10 and under?
So it's a little different. We weren't as hard and fast about screen time. It's really more about the quality of the media use and the times that you're not multitasking with media through everything else in the rest of your day, and really trying to make sure that you're single tasking on your homework, on your sports or your chess club or any other activity that really helps you connect with other people or connect with your own mind, and sleep and sleep.
Well, what do you think? You're a doctor. I mean, let's say.
So time is hard. I mean, I find that time is really easy to measure in research. We ask parents how many hours per day. I'm not really sure that parents know how to recall what their kids are doing now that device use is so on-demand and intermittent. So what I care more about in some of my current research questions is how much is media just kind of pervasively creating kind of a thin film around all the other stuff that we're doing and all the times for like boredom or creativity or distress tolerance or other downtime. So to get back to your question though, I really think it varies by family, but in most families with school-aged kids, it's going to be an hour or 2 or 3, but really varying day to day and making sure it's social. We've really evolved a new way of all looking at our own devices, and our emphasis in the AAP was really to make it more creative, more connected with the people around you, and more thoughtful, and not just emotionally spewing onto the devices that you're using.
It was striking in the new data that just came out today from FOSI that parents were overwhelmingly far more concerned about the type of interaction, not the time. I thought that was interesting because I'm worried about how much time I spend. So let's start down there and just answer the question, are we addicted? What do you think? Are we addicted to tech?
Well, I'm going to take on the definitional issue of addiction, which the best example I could think of is infants exposed to opioids in utero, once born, will go through withdrawal. That's addiction. Same infants a little bit later on see a smartphone with a touch screen and they want it, to the point that they sell toys with, you can use as a decoy for your smartphone. They will get cranky if you take it away. It's not an addiction in the classical sense of the term. People use it colloquially. It can create a lot of suffering for an individual and for the people that care about them. And I'm not minimizing that, but it's not an addiction per se.
What do you have to say, Catherine?
I think we get too caught up on the terminology, and we should focus more on, is this healthy? I mean, I talk about it in terms of a relationship because very few people will push back. I mean, everyone gets how to break up with your phone. With that said, all of the addiction specialists I've spoken to for the book did feel comfortable with that. The simplest definition of addiction that one of them gave to me, actually when I asked in preparation for this panel, it was continued use despite adverse consequences.
Continued use even though you know it's bad for you.
Yes, and so then the question becomes, do we know it's bad for us? That's a separate thing, but yeah. So I would say if I were really pushed to say yes or no, I would say yes, but I think it's
so maybe, why don't we lose addiction and just say, do we have a problem? I mean, do most people in America have a problem that brings adverse effects? Whether it's harder to sleep, it's not good for your eyes, it's hard for your memory. Jordan, you're always contrary about this. What do you think? Is this a problem?
Well, I think certainly there are problems, and there are people that have problems, and that many of us have problems. Many of us have problems with a lot of things in America, unhealthy relationships to things like food, and to things like money, and to things like work. We have lots of unhealthy relationships to things, and so I think that's certainly a problem. But I wouldn't say that's necessarily the tech's fault, right? There's many of us who don't have problems. There's many people who have very healthy relationships with tech. There's many people, just like there's many people who have very healthy relationships with lots of things. So, I'm wary of making the technology itself the villain rather than the humans, and our inability to handle those tools, these objects, appropriately is the real, in my opinion, the real problem.
But let's take cigarettes. There's a warning on cigarettes that say that too much of this is bad, or alcohol, too much of this is bad. Should there be some kind of something on screens that say, bing, you've hit 10 hours today. This could have adverse effects for sleeping, your vision, should there be something like that?
That's a big question. I think what's really hard about deciding that is that we had lots and lots of research on the adverse effects of smoking. And cigarettes didn't really change that much over the decades that research was happening.
Interesting.
So you could do studies and say, yes, this is definitively linked with low birth weight, with cancer, with COPD. I'm a researcher, and it often takes me on the course of years from the minute an idea pops into my head to when I publish it and can communicate it either to policymakers or to parents. And so with the rapid adoption and rate of technology evolution, it's so hard to keep up in terms of the research to validly and accurately make a statement like this is really bad for this. I think that to build off of the addiction conversation, which ties into this point, is that I do think that one thing that needs more study and needs more rapid response study, so we can really give parents meaningful help that doesn't sound judgy, that doesn't sound polarized, it's really just about do this, don't do this, it'll be better for your kids, is we need to know more about the really, what leads to these problematic behaviors. You know, in clinic, I do see a lot of parents coming in saying they're not interested in anything else. They're only motivated by technology. It's really hard to transition them off. We're arguing about it all the time. It's not everyone. It's a subset, and it's often more vulnerable kids. It's kids who are younger, who have weaker executive functions, who have weaker self-regulation, all these things that are tied into all the other problematic relationships that we have with substances or other things in our lives. And I think that parents don't know what to do because we don't have up-to-date research. One of the things I think about a lot is that parents really want to either follow our guidelines or they really want to achieve some tech-life balance in their households, but they have a hard time doing it. And it's not because they're not trying hard. It's not because they haven't heard all of these concerns about children and technology. It's because the children's digital environment and the system that they're working in is really trying to keep kids engaged. It's an engagement-based model of design that is really hard for parents to work against, and that's so I'm more interested in less than calling it addiction. I'm more kind of interested in talking about what are kids' vulnerabilities and how are the design features of the technology that we've created over the past 10 years kind of taking advantage of some of those vulnerabilities and making it harder.
We're going to come back certainly and ask a lot of people about their recommendations, but since you're talking about research and you're trying to get $95 million for this. What are the key things that both Republicans and Democrats, and by the way, in this town, when you say Republicans and Democrats both agree, this is news. So apparently, on both sides of the aisle, there is an agreement with Jenny that we don't have enough research and that they're going to hopefully do this in the new year, the new Congress?
Well, the Congress is about to end, so we'll be having a new Congress start in January. Our hope is that this is the type of bill that can move in 2019. You've got 6 senators who both hail from all different parts of the country and from all different political persuasions. Ed Markey, Michael Bennet, Brian Schatz being Democrats, but also Roy Blunt, Ben Sasse, and Susan Collins being Republicans. When you've got that type of diversity supporting the same idea, it's clear that there is both momentum behind it. And I would also want to say that Congress is a reactionary body, right? Congress is reacting to what we see out there. Just sitting here right now, by the way, I counted 39 people who've looked at their phones in the last 5 minutes. So it's obvious that there's something that's going on in the world, and senators pick up on that because senators oftentimes speak in groups, and they see people look down.
What do you think that, Susan Collins and Roy Blunt, what are they hearing that people want studied? They want the link between what and what? What are they wondering? What are the big questions?
The biggest question that people have is, what is this doing to my kids? Like, what is the impact on my kids? I have a 2-year-old. I'm just on the brink or the cusp of all of these problems. People want to know, how does it affect the kids physically? That's sleeping, that's eating. How does it affect their social, emotional status? That's
But
making
don't we know
relationships.
some of that? I mean, don't we know some of that? Catherine, what do you think?
I would love to meet with you guys. I mean, it's pretty crazy to think about how many different ways this is impacting us. I should say I love technologies. I'm not against technology anyway. But to follow up on what you're saying in terms of adults, I think we're talking obviously about children, but we first need to look in the mirror and recognize our relationships with technology. I was speaking to people earlier who counted 55 people on their phones during one of the previous sessions, and I know we're supposed to be like tweeting about this, but people were not tweeting, and it was Facebook and email, whatever. I think it's very important as adults for us to become more aware of that habit and ask yourself, was there actually a conscious thought the last time, and I'll count myself this too, the last time you found your phone in your hand? Was that because you actually thought about it and then you reached for it for a purpose, or is it because you just did it and then it was there and then 3 minutes passed, 40 minutes passed, and you're like, wait, what happened, right? So point being, it's affecting children and adults. As to your question about how is it affecting us, two things, many ways: focus, creativity, productivity, physical health in terms of posture. You have self-esteem, empathy, sleep. But two I would focus on in particular quickly would be creativity. This is something most people wouldn't think about. I've spoken with some of you about this already, but if creativity is defined as the ability to make connections between seemingly unconnected things, that requires you to have a lot of connected thoughts and information in your brain. That actually is a form of long-term memory, and it requires the creation of new proteins in your brain. It's a physical change. It cannot happen if you're distracted. So there's one issue. You actually are preventing the physical changes in your brain that lead people to be able to be smart and creative and productive. And the other thing I would say is that I have type 1 diabetes and very interested in endocrinology and hormones. When you hear the dings from your phone and when you're constantly on call with your phone, you're getting spikes in your cortisol levels. And cortisol is a fight or flight hormone. It's essential if you're fighting or fleeing, but it is well proven to be bad for you, very bad, if it is elevated over the long term, increasing risks for everything from obesity and cancer, type 2 diabetes, stroke, cardiovascular disease, etc. That is happening with our phones, and I think that we need to be aware as parents and as people ourselves that this is a real thing. In terms of sleep deprivation, defined as just a couple, like 1 or 2 hours under 8 a night for like a week or two, raises the risks for all those other things and also spikes cortisol. So if you think just about the fact that our phones are keeping us up later, that alone is a concern. So I don't mean to sound alarmist, but as someone who's spent years writing about medical things and trying to put these pieces together, I think there's real reasons for concerns for both us and our children, and it is something we should be taking very seriously so that we can create healthy relationships with our devices and learn to create better boundaries, and also put consumer pressure on companies to help create products that will help us. I was really heartened by some of the stuff I saw upstairs. So,
James,
yeah.
Would you pick a couple of things that's very interesting what you're saying about sleep and creativity? What are researchers, what would they love to study?
Well, I think the first thing, we want people to be critical consumers of what they hear, including even the research. And the biggest things are, correlation does not imply causation. Use of cell phones goes up and whatever goes up, so it must be caused by increased cell phone use or media technology. That may be the case, but it may be something completely different. The same thing is over time. Oh, you've watched this much television and now 3 years later you're exhibiting these behavior issues. So watching TV must have caused that. No, there may have been some common things going on, or again, temperament, genetics, epigenetics, whatever contributed to the fact that, you were somewhat predisposed, and it may just be television, but it could have just as easily been something else. What we really want to untangle, really at the brain development all the way up to the social aspects, is exactly what is going on, what are the mechanistic relationships, and again, for interventions, what can we meaningfully do? I know right now people are doing mindfulness meditation in preschool classrooms to teach children to be quiet, to have nothing else going on, no other stimulation, and just to be with their breathing and their thoughts. That's really remarkable, and I think it's one of those things that even simple things like that sometimes can be very effective in terms of resetting.
Can you correlate that with the inputs that we're getting now?
I don't think we really know. I think we see some short-term effects, but I think it's one of those things where again, I don't want everyone to run out and now say, that's what they need to do. I'm using that as an example of saying, I think sometimes we have to look at different steps that people can take and again, systematically research them, including exposure to different electronic media or technology, and then being able to systematically see what those effects look like.
So France has just moved on this, and very soon, no child in France is allowed to bring to school a smartphone under 15, if the kid is under 15. And they had banned, several years ago in elementary schools, they said you can't take out a phone in class. But then they were seeing at lunchtime that the kids weren't talking, they were on the phone. And so this is a big move across the board. Do you think anything like that is down the line for the United States?
You want me to answer that?
Go ahead.
Well, I don't know if something like that's down the line for the United States, but I hope not.
Because?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go there. Because I think we often think about things like productivity and creativity as if they're neutral, as if they exist in a vacuum, but we are humans. What we do is we're productive and creative using tools, right? Using language, using pens, using chalkboards, using paper, using books. And if we don't teach the kids, where are we supposed to teach the kids to have the healthy way to be creative with these things? How do we teach kids to actually talk if they're not going to have the thing that distracts them, right? You can't, I'll give you an example. I teach, I'm a college professor, and I often hear all the other college professors saying things like, these kids today, they don't know how to use the library. And I always just want to go, well, teach them. You're the teacher, right? So you need to have the tools in front of you to be able to teach people how to live a healthy relationship with it. You can't go, here's the instruction manual, and now we hope that you handle it okay when we give it to you.
What's wrong with saying, the 10-year-olds should go out and play at school as opposed to being, clearly if there's a cell phone there.
I'm not saying there's something wrong with that. I'm saying how do we teach them to do that instead of the cell phone when the cell phone isn't also there?
Can I answer that?
Yes.
So in Ann Arbor public schools, I think some of the high schools are using Pocket Points, which is an app that if kids don't check their phone during school, they get extra points that gives them discounts at local businesses. So it's a way to self-regulate a phone you've brought to school, but you've inhibited that impulse to use it during school hours. Now, I don't know, this may not work across the board for all kids. It worked great for our babysitter, who's very sweet. But I don't know that...
wait a minute, so
yeah.
What did you tell the babysitter? You said if you don't...
No, it wasn't during babysitting my kids. She never checks her phone during babysitting my kids. No, I'm kidding.
But that would be a good idea.
Yeah.
You could tell a babysitter, it says, if you don't go out of your phone or my kids don't, I'll pay you double, right? Anyway, just a thought.
Well, I want to get to the point of it depends on the design of the tool that you have access to. And that is a great idealized vision of the way to use good tools. But the truth is that a lot of the tools that are winding up in some underserved schools are not that great. And even in some of the Ann Arbor public schools, we sometimes, have our kids coming home saying that they watched YouTube or played video games, and it's just a matter of what they have access to and what the busy teachers and administrators don't have time to necessarily know exactly what kids are doing all the time. The other question of design is also what kids are doing at home. Is that, we just did a study looking at apps on the Design for Families 5 and Under and Google Play, and we saw that the free apps were much more packed with ads and much more packed with distracting things that may detract from the educational objectives, if there is one, of some of these apps marketed to young kids, whereas the ones that you pay had a lot more open-ended design, creative problem solving, no ads at all, maybe even a prompt to include your parent in playing with, Peppa Pig. Like, it was very interesting to look at the divide there between what's available for free on the App Store and what parents will pay for. So it really does, it's not to blame all of technology, but it is to say we need smarter design that is helping kids know how to use technology the right way, and we also need smarter design that's not kind of nudging out the parent and just sucking the child's attention in with kind of irrelevant distractors, but instead making a place for the parent so the parent can act as a mentor too.
Is there any kind of agreement on this number of hours per day regularly is really bad for you? It's bad for your vision even. Isn't there some?
There's research, but it's all done on TV and video games. And it's really like...
And is it very different? Let's talk about that for a second. Is it very different, your smartphone than your desktop than your video game?
We haven't studied those things yet because it's so new. So as Jim was talking, I was thinking of the two studies that came to mind that had longitudinally, over time, looked at mobile device use and outcomes. And I can explain them to you right now if you really want to know the science, but basically that's the only two studies I can think of that have been published about, one was parent tech use, showing over time, if you're using technology a lot during activities with your kids act crankier. And when your kids act crankier, you withdraw from them more during time with your kids, and that worsens over time. So the other one was about preteens and emergence of ADHD symptoms when they were using a lot of technology and checking it, over the course of 2 years, they monitored kids.
I go into offices now and I see a lot of people wearing these screen glasses. That they say the blue light is, they work for a living on a screen and they're worried about their vision, strain of eye. Is there some thought, James, about seeing eye strain? I mean, there's a lot of professions that 10, 12 hours a day you're looking at the screen.
Well, I know the blue light concern led to, some of the, I'll use Apple, and for example, that they have now, you can turn down the blue light after a certain time, which supposedly you're going to be able to sleep better. And I mean, there's clearly was enough research behind that they took action. There's a number of those concerns that I think those are a different set, and again, I'm less knowledgeable about, but clearly there's a lot of people who are studying the physical effects of interacting with technology. This is going beyond if you sit too close to the TV, you're going to be cross-eyed, that kind of thing. I did want to comment, though. I was earlier, a couple months ago, at a conference at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, sponsored by Children and Screens. And I happened to be at a breakfast with a postdoc from Germany who was there for another conference on mitochondrial DNA. And she said, my parents never let me watch TV growing up. And there you go. Never watched TV, and now she's studying mitochondrial DNA as a postdoc in Germany. And I said, well, in America, a lot of people, they would get around that. And she said, I went to my friends and watched TV all the time. So there went that theory. I think, so for the physical effects as well as some of the other effects, I do think there are potentially issues that need to be addressed. There are some issues with exposure to radio frequencies and things of that nature. Again, a lot of that, we study those things, a lot of people study those things, and a lot of concerns have been raised. It's a separate set of questions, but one that obviously is very important as well.
What do you think the role of the government is here? Clearly, a lot of people are concerned. Is it to fund research? Is it to legislate? Is there something? What's the government role?
I think the government role to start is to fund research, right? I don't think our role isn't to create mandates on phones must have X or Y on them, or parents are supposed to do X or Y. But government is supposed to. NIH is the preeminent health research organization in the world. Right? We should be funding that research to give parents the tools. Parents are asking members, what do I do about this? Right? How is this impacting my children? We should be responding in some way.
And what do we tell the parents? What should they be doing?
Well, I have been mostly telling parents lately, there's some parents want a screen time rule. They say, doctor, tell me how much time.
Right.
Because I want to tell my kid that you told me it was only an hour.
Right.
And I'll say that. I'll say, fine. But more important to me is that you stop playing that shooter game because you went to school and you pretended to shoot a friend and you got in trouble. So that, they have to be unpacking what's the best fit of media for their particular kid.
So again, you're more worried about what kind
the content matters so much.
More than the actual hours.
Well, yeah, you can get to a point where I have had some patients who are watching or playing video games for 5, 6, 7 hours a day, and yes, that's displacing way too many other things. But for most families, it's a matter of the content. It's also a matter of what kids can get access to. A lot of kids are just using regular YouTube, so it doesn't have all the content filters that YouTube Kids has. So they're just, so many times in clinic, I'll look over their shoulder, like, what you watching? And it's some scary video of like Halloween and something totally violent that the child doesn't understand. So content is arousing, kids mimic it. So I really talk about changing content with families. I also talk with families about not using tech as the main way that you calm your kids down and that you relieve their boredom, because we need some times of boredom and distress tolerance. We need for you, when you're experiencing as a parent the distress of watching your child in distress, you need to be empowered to be able to help them through that tough moment. That is so important for kids' social and emotional development over time. And I do say, if it's just getting too hairy and you're fighting about it all the time, just create some unplugged times where you all can just single task and hang out and not feel as pulled in a million different directions.
Jordan, if parents say to you, I'm worried about this, he doesn't want to talk at dinner, or I worry about his vision or his sleeplessness or a little bit of anxiety, he's looking too much about what everybody else is doing, what do you say to parents?
In most cases, I say to parents to remember that our job as parents is to teach our kids and to model for our kids good ways of behaving and interacting with the tools, ethical ways of behaving and interacting with the tools in the world in which we live, in ways that are positive for the economic paradigm in which we live, the technological paradigm in which we live, the cultural paradigm in which we live. That's our job as parents. We need to teach our kids how to live an ethical, fulfilled, happy, healthy life using the tools around them. And so that's what I tell them, and that's really something we all have to decide as parents, what works and what doesn't.
Could you say that in another way? I mean, are you saying you have to figure it out for each kid of yours, or?
Absolutely.
You're just saying.
No, I think you absolutely have to figure it out for each kid. Just like you have some kids who want to hide in the closet and read books all the time, and that's not really healthy either if they're not talking to people and going out and playing. I have one kid who does that. I have another kid who's on video games all the time, and I have very different ways of steering them towards activities.
So can you give me some words for the kid that is on TV? Like, what do you say? Give me a couple sentences.
Well, with my kids, I don't tend to use a restriction of how much time. I tend to use a requirement for how much time they must do other things.
Oh, interesting.
Right? So how much time do I expect them to be outside? How much time do I expect them to be reading? How much time do I expect them to be playing? There's only so much screen time you can fit in.
And is dinner time a no-no?
Mostly, although there are certainly times when we're having a conversation and one of us goes, hey, we want to look something up, and that's a really useful way to do it. It's certainly a no-no for them to be watching a YouTube video by themselves while we're in the middle of a conversation, but it would also be a no-no for me to be watching a YouTube video right now while you and I are having a conversation.
Right.
That has nothing to do with dinner. It's just
right. Catherine, do you have a couple words? And then I want to ask about what should cell phone companies be doing, and the other technology makers, what kind of responsibility they have. But do you want to?
Yeah, I would love to jump in. I mean, first of all, in the research, I think it's great that research is being funded, but I would like to point out that we're in the midst of a giant uncontrolled experiment right now because no one thought to create a control group who didn't have smartphones, and now everyone has them. So in a way, you wouldn't be able to get a trial passed if you thought the smartphone was a negative intervention, right? You can't test it if you think it's going to hurt people. So in a way, I would try to focus on the removal of the smartphone technology as a way to test this. But in the meantime, I would say, as people and parents, if you trust your instincts here, if you think there's a problem with your family's use of the technology, or your own or your kids, there is, because it's your family. And what I would say that I would like us to do a bit more of is, while it's important, I think, to talk about screen time limits, et cetera, it's missing the broader point. This is about how we live our lives as adults and as kids, and what we prioritize and what we want to spend our time on. And one thing I say when people ask, why does this matter? I say, we're all going to die, okay? How much time do you ultimately want to spend on the screen? And if it is, you know what, I love playing that game, or I love Instagram, that's fine, but it's an opportunity for us all to use these devices in our pockets to take a step back and ask, how do we want to be living? What do we want to be spending our time on? And when you have answers to those questions, that's when you can start introducing things with your family and with yourself, such as screen time limits, or things that you aren't going to do, or rituals, because now it has meaning. It doesn't feel like a diet. It feels like you're making steps towards living the lives you want to lead. So I really encourage people to think of that philosophical shift in the way that you're thinking about this. And then once you have that, again, there's lots of practical things you can do to make your phone less tempting so that you actually can use it when you want to without getting distracted, and ways that you can engage your children. One other thought on that is that when I heard a child psychologist give a talk about tobacco company anti-smoking campaigns, it was saying that when you just tell kids not to smoke because it causes lung cancer, they don't listen because it's condescending and they're invincible. The one that worked was saying tobacco companies are manipulating you and they think you're dumb. And so that made me think that one way to talk to your kids about this is not to say, I want to restrict your screen time top down. Instead say, what do you think about my relationship with my phone? Like, I'm interested in this subject, I just went to this conference. What do you think about me as your parents' relationship? And what would you like to see me do? And that opens the conversation in a way that empowers the kid. It goes from adult down to equals. And you probably will learn something that will upset you. But then you're also in a position where as a family you can experiment. There's no right answer to how much screen time or what you're doing. Experiment and see what's right for you as a family. I think that's much more effective as a long-term strategy than to just start with restrictions without any specific
This empowering
reason.
the child is very important.
Yeah.
Also right now, there's enormous amount of focus on Facebook. They created this amazing community worldwide. I love getting birthday wishes on Facebook. It's done all kinds of wonderful things. But there's a lot of people also feel that Facebook created something and they didn't really have safeguards on it. And obviously there's a lot of talk about that now. So in that vein, the makers of technology, what are these people who are making massive amounts of money? And they've obviously done some good things. I mean, it's wonderful all that smartphones and video games and other computers can do. But what should they be doing? Because we all clearly think that there are some issues here.
My boss always talks about good corporate responsibility, right? Part of the reason why we introduced this bill is not just to pass the bill, but it's also to create the conversation and force companies to grapple with these issues. So I think these are the type of things that these companies precisely must be thinking about right now and considering what the impact has been on society.
What would you like?
Well, I would love Apple to share its screen time data with researchers and create a little export button so that participants can send us what they're doing on their phones, because that is being able to work with tech companies on research to trust that we're not just out to prove that all tech is bad, but to try to help families know the best ways to use tech. I think is great that there's more of a conversation between Apple and Facebook and academics now. There's more of a conversation between YouTube and academics to be like, wait, we did this all really fast. Let's take a breath and figure out the best ways to move forward, which I think is great. I think my main advice for tech developers for kids is don't assume that someone else is going to take responsibility for the kids' data protection or design ethics or anything else. That's one of the tenets of a lot of the work done in the UK and in Europe right now. You should look up childrensdesignguide.org, which is a very child-focused set of ethics and principles about designing for kids. Look at some of the 5 Rights Foundation, which is about understanding why persuasive design and some of these adult models of designing tech are not really appropriate for kids. And there's a reason that PBS is trusted, because it is designing tech with the child in mind, and that's what tech companies could gain by using that approach.
Anybody else about what tech companies should be doing?
Yes.
What do you want,
I
Catherine?
think it's very interesting. Well, first of all, let's talk about business models. Facebook, how can they really change? It's an advertising-based business model. They make money off of taking our attention from us and data. So, I mean, meaningful connections on Facebook can only be so true. But if you're the phone maker like Apple or Google or Samsung, whatever, you have a desire for people to love the devices, and I think there's more room there for customers to speak up and say this is important to us, we want more options. And Apple and Google have already started to do that with their digital well-being initiatives. But what strikes me is if you start thinking critically about your device, think about the options that are there that make you more connected to your phone, and then think about what options are not there that would make it easier to set boundaries. For example, many people probably have a picture of a loved one on your home screen, your lock screen, right? I certainly used to have my daughter on that. Well, that makes it feel like an extension of yourself. It's fine, but just be aware it's making you closer to it. Or you can personalize Siri. My Siri is a British man, right? But I can't set an automatic text message response easily. And that is a reason that people tell me they can't put their phone down for an hour because they're worried they'll miss a text. So it should be that I can say there's this group of people and I want to be able to respond automatically in different contexts. You can get a workaround with that in do not disturb while driving mode in Apple, but it's not for that, and you really have to think about it. Similarly, we should be able to have home screens that are different for nights and weekends and vacation and workday, where you see different apps. You can do a bit of this on Android, but it's not something people do. That ideally would be pre-scheduled, so you could say, I know that when I walk at 5 p.m. every day, I want my work email to get off my screen so I'm not tempted, right? And you also could have it be based on location awareness. So I guess my point being, I think that there's a real market opportunity for companies to align their desire for pleasing their shareholders with actually creating features that would enhance our ability to live healthily with our devices.
Is there anything you would like to see, James, from cell phone companies?
3 words: self-driving cars. Why do we do that? Because people are shaving, putting on makeup, texting, doing all things, rather than focusing on driving. I'd much rather have people be able to take a step back, focus on driving, and the same thing with the technology, be able to self-regulate and model for their children how to self-regulate their tech use, interact with them. I mean, I'm not saying that building in some of these things into the technology is not a good thing. I think that probably is, but it really does come down to the user and modeling for children who maybe don't have those executive function skills as well developed yet, how to put it away or the proper use and things of that nature.
And are you worried about vision, like too much time? I mean, aren't there certain things? Is there anything that I know, I mean, I work with people that are crazy maniacs who spend too much time on the screen, but you're not worried about that? Okay, I'll feel better. Okay,
I'm a scientist.
Okay, all right. And Jordan, is there anything that you feel like the company should be doing? We've talked about the parents, we've talked about the government and funding.
I agree with what everyone else has said, and we're pretty much out of time,
okay.
So I'll let it go. So.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much.